Once there was a young boy and a girl who lived in a small town. They were married, and everyone around them admired their love. The boy worked hard every day to give his wife a good life, and the girl took care of him with love and kindness. They were poor but happy. The two of them always shared food, water, and even their dreams together. One day, the girl started feeling very weak. At first, they thought it was just a small sickness, but soon it grew worse. The boy tried to bring medicine, he called doctors, and even prayed for her health. But nothing worked. The girl became thinner and weaker with every passing day. The boy stayed awake at night, watching her, giving her water when she was thirsty, and holding her hand with tears in his eyes. Finally, after many weeks of suffering, the girl closed her eyes forever. The boy was broken. He felt like a part of his own soul had been taken away. The house that once felt warm and alive now felt cold and empty. Every corner of the home reminded him of her laughter, her smile, and her voice. At first, the boy refused to believe she was gone. He would sit by the door, hoping she would return. Many nights, he dreamed of her calling his name, and he woke up crying. His family tried to comfort him. They told him life must go on, but the pain in his heart was too heavy. Still, time kept moving. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Slowly, the boy realized that no matter how much he cried, she would not come back. And this was only the beginning of his long and painful journey, a journey where love, loss, and strange events were waiting for him. The boy's first strange experience happened on a cold and silent night. The sky outside was clear, filled with stars, and the forest around his house looked calm. He sat near the small fire inside his room, trying to read a book, when suddenly he heard something unusual. It was the sound of footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps, as if someone was walking just outside his wooden door. At first, he thought maybe it was a wild animal from the forest, a deer, a wolf, or maybe even a bear. The mountains were full of such creatures, so he tried to stay calm. But the footsteps were different. They were too steady, too human. Curiosity got the better of him. He picked up a lantern and slowly opened the creaking door. The cold wind rushed in, and the forest stood before him in silence. The moonlight shone across the trees, and the ground was empty. He looked left and right, but there was no one there. Not even a sign of an animal. Only the sound of dry leaves moving in the breeze. Confused, he stepped outside and walked around the house. Still, he found nothing. But just as he turned back toward the door, he heard it again, the same footsteps. This time, they sounded like they were following right behind him. The boy froze. His heart beat faster, and his hands shook as the lantern's flame flickered. He spun around quickly, expecting to see someone. But there was nothing. Only the long, dark shadows of the trees stood still under the moonlight. Terrified, he rushed back inside and shut the door tightly. His breathing was heavy, and sweat rolled down his forehead even in the cold night. He told himself it was only his imagination, that perhaps the wind made the sound. But deep inside, he felt something invisible had entered his life that night. Something that had just begun. After that first night, the boy tried to forget what had happened. He told himself it was just the wind, just the silence of the mountains playing tricks on his mind. But deep inside, fear had already taken root. The nights no longer felt safe. A few days later, something even stranger began. It started when he was lying in bed, half asleep. At first, he thought he was dreaming, but then he heard it clearly, a whisper. A soft, low voice calling his name. Come. The sound was faint, but it was close, as if someone stood right next to his ear. The boy jumped up, looking around the dark room. The lantern on the table had gone out, and the only light came from the pale moon outside the window. The room was empty. His heart raced. He told himself it was nothing and forced himself back under the blanket. But just as he closed his eyes, the whispers returned. This time, there were many voices, whispering together, overlapping, too fast to understand. They came from the corners of the room, from the walls, even from under his bed. The boy covered his ears, but the voices still reached him. It felt like they were inside his head. He prayed silently, asking for the night to end. Slowly, the whispers faded, leaving him trembling in fear. The next evening, he tried to stay awake by keeping a candle burning, but the whispers returned again. They were patient. They always came when darkness filled the mountains. The boy began to notice something worse. The whispers were growing stronger each night. Sometimes they no longer stayed soft. Instead, they hissed angrily, as if warning him or trying to lure him closer. He realized that his nights of peace were over. The mountains were not silent anymore. They were speaking to him through voices that did not belong to the living. The whispers were only the beginning. As the nights passed, something new and far more terrifying began to happen inside the boy's house. It started with the shadows. One night, as he sat near his small fire, he noticed a movement on the wall. At first, he thought it was the flame flickering, but then he realized the shadow did not belong to him. It was taller, thinner, and moved differently. Slowly, it walked across the wall as if a person was inside the room, though no one was there. The boy froze in his chair, staring at the shadow. His own shadow was on the opposite side, short and small, but this other one stretched unnaturally long, reaching the ceiling. When he turned his head to look around the room, there was nothing. Yet, when his eyes returned to the wall, the shadow was still there, standing perfectly still, as if it was watching him. From that night on, shadows began to appear more often. Sometimes he saw them crawling along the floor, sometimes slipping across the walls, even when no light could have made them. They moved like living beings, slow, deliberate, and aware of him. One evening, he woke up in the middle of the night to find a dark figure standing in the corner of his room. It looked like a man, tall and silent, but no details could be seen, only pure blackness. His body shook with fear, and he could not move. The figure didn't approach, it only stood there, watching until he shut his eyes tightly. When he opened them again, it was gone. But the fear stayed. The boy understood now that he was not only hearing the spirits. He was seeing them. The shadows were proof that something had entered his home, and they were getting stronger every night. The boy thought the shadows were the worst thing that could happen, but he was wrong. The spirits were only preparing him for something even more frightening. One night, he was lying in bed, trying to keep his eyes closed, when he felt a sudden coldness in the room. It was not the usual mountain chill. This was different. It was heavy, sharp, and filled with dread. The air seemed to stop moving, and even his breath came out like smoke in the freezing dark. Slowly, he opened his eyes. At first, he saw nothing but the pale light of the moon shining through the window. But then, near the foot of his bed, he noticed a figure. It was standing still, tall and thin, its body glowing faintly white like mist. The boy's heart pounded in his chest. He rubbed his eyes, hoping it was a dream, but when he looked again, the figure was closer. The face was the worst part. It was pale, almost colorless, with hollow black eyes that seemed endless. Its mouth hung open unnaturally wide, as if frozen in a silent scream. The boy wanted to shout, but no sound came out. His body refused to move, trapped in terror. The ghost leaned closer, its shadow stretching across the walls. The boy felt its cold breath near his face, though its lips never moved. The room was filled with silence, yet the boy's ears rang as if the figure was screaming inside his head. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. The air warmed again, and the silence of the mountains returned. The boy gasped for breath, tears in his eyes, his whole body shaking. From that night, he knew the truth. This was no trick of shadows, no whisper of the wind. The dead had found him, and they wanted him to see them. The boy could no longer bear it. The footsteps, the whispers, the moving shadows, and now the terrifying ghost, everything had become too much for him. He realized he could not spend another night in that haunted house. If he stayed, he felt he would lose his mind, or his life. The next morning, he packed a small bag with food, water, and a lantern. His hands trembled as he closed the door of the wooden house behind him. He looked back one last time at the place he once called home, but now it felt like a prison filled with unseen eyes. He whispered to himself, "I must leave. I must get away from this cursed mountain." As he walked down the narrow path, the forest seemed unusually dark, even though it was still early evening. The trees stood tall and twisted, their branches reaching out like arms. The silence was unnatural. No birds sang, no wind blew. Only the crunch of his footsteps broke the stillness. But soon he began to hear them again. The whispers. They floated around him, circling closer with every step. The boy tried to walk faster, but the voices grew louder, calling his name, hissing, laughing. It felt as if the mountain itself was alive, trying to trap him. Suddenly, he saw a shadow dart across the path ahead. Then another. His lantern flickered wildly, and he stumbled, almost falling. He wanted to scream, but fear locked his throat. No matter how fast he walked, the whispers followed, whispering closer, closer, until they were at his ear. At last, he collapsed on the ground, shaking. He realized the truth he could not escape. The spirits were not bound to the house. They belonged to the mountains themselves. And the mountains would never let him go. The boy lay on the cold ground, his lantern broken, the darkness swallowing him completely. The whispers were all around now, louder than ever, overlapping like 1,000 voices speaking at once. Some laughed, some cried, and some shouted his name again and again. He covered his ears, but it made no difference. The voices were inside his head. He forced himself to stand and ran back toward the house, the only place he knew. But when he reached it, the door opened on its own, as if the house had been waiting for him. With trembling legs, he stepped inside. The air was thick and freezing, and the shadows immediately crawled along the walls to greet him. That night, he realized there was no escape. The spirits were not outside. They lived inside the house, inside the mountains, and now inside him. His home had become their home. Every corner of the house echoed with whispers. Every wall stretched with moving shadows. Every night, a pale figure appeared by his bed, its black eyes fixed on him, its mouth silently screaming. The boy tried everything, lighting candles, praying, even staying awake all night, but nothing worked. The spirits were patient. They did not need sleep. They would wait for him in the silence. Days passed, then weeks. The boy no longer felt like himself. His eyes grew dark, his voice weak, and his mind clouded with fear. He could not remember the last time he had seen the sunrise without dreading the coming night. The mountains had claimed him. Now he was just another soul trapped within the haunted house. To travelers passing through the valley, his house looked abandoned, but at night, faint lights flickered inside, and sometimes a voice could be heard calling for help. The boy had become part of the haunting, forever bound to the mountains that never let him go. Darkness hides many secrets, and you've just heard one of them. If you enjoyed this horror story, watch more from our channel. Each story will take you deeper into fear. Don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might be even scarier than this one.